beginning. So for today, like I actually just want to open, wouldn't call it a problem because it's not a negative. It's maybe it's a dilemma, um, or challenge or something like more to the positive side than to the negative side. Um, and and maybe potentially the best way to open it is to like have a few minute example, and that might lead uh, lead us to the dilemma slash challenge, if that works. But I'll do that, and I'll do that by sharing a screen. But before that, I will actually open the thing itself, which is a boring photograph. Yes, I do have it. Right, and then I will share the screen. Ta-da! So, um, this is an example among many uh, potential examples, but I can start from here. And I will turn it into a more folksy, loose-handed story by adding a slight prelude. So this is a cafe slash restaurant slash bar, in Oxel, which doesn't really matter where it is, uh, but nevertheless. So I walked in here, and there was this strange man, which was I guess the restaurant slash bar owner, or at least behaved like such, um, in some manners, who was talking German, and he had this very strange style, which was both like friendly and kind of inviting. He said to me in German that was essentially something like "Join and sit down, young man." I remember the junge man, but there was something in the voice that was both kind of like I mean, clearly kind of like a friendly comment, but it had almost like this old Gothic movie dramatics in, in it. Maybe it was because like when owners do these kind of things, you that they might do it for the job of it. So maybe it introduces strange qualities, but it almost reminded me of Bela Lugosi. Not that it sounded like Bela Lugosi, but it had something of these qualities. And this made me sit down and write down uh, uh, like a sentence which was um, intentionally a bit cheesy, but nevertheless. Uh, and the sentence was social vampires and the multitude of their personalities. So this kind of starts before moments before what I wrote in the group, uh, and that actually kind of and of course I was thinking of this, like what is the draw of this person, like how do they draw, and drawing in terms of like drawing people in, but how that is also kind of almost a certain form of vampirism. But then I made it multitude of their personalities, because then I think the personalities as a word was almost too little, but it's sort of this sort of like different people who draw people in the widest sense of the draw, um, that that kind of opened this and this thought in itself. But but then when I sat down, I noticed that there was really no people. It was actually, I could have panned this picture and there were no other people around, which was one of the reasons I sat down, not because I was asked to, but there were also no people on the streets. So so there were no really vampires to process, uh, 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 or social vampires. So I rather turned it to made another essentially, which was this social ghost then, and multitude of their, and then I struggled, like, because it's not personalities now. Because I was looking at those chairs and like how the idea of an empty chair is like, if you think of it in terms of ghosts in a very wide spectrum, there's this, like, if you see such a chair, there's almost like an imprint or tracing of a person that is coming to sit there or could sit there. So it's almost like it's one step towards tangibility that there could be a person in that empty seat. And this was what I was thinking when I wrote down social ghosts, and then the multitude of their. I went through many forms like constructions, etc., but then ended up with conglomerates at that point, because like what seemed to me like there was this like a one form, like it seemed like a person sitting here is almost like it would have this sort of tails. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it doesn't really matter. Like tails of running from the person coming to sit there and moving away from there. But the other thing I saw was cars, and there were empty cars parked. There's actually one in the picture, but it's really badly visible. So I didn't. Well, it doesn't matter. It's just an empty car. Um, so because then the empty car had the similar quality, but was also different, because then the ghost of a person there in the empty car was much more moving, probably setting into the car to zip out and move into different places, and this kind of opened up the like these forms, and how the forms are different. So so hence like conglomerate seem to be a form of like how these kind of bodies are formed in a way socially, like there's this almost like social understanding, but then they kind of take different forms themselves. But then immediately like this started to like immediately open up, like there is a football player here on the left that is painted on the wall, and this was, I don't know, it's probably some particular football player, which also makes it another kind of a ghost again. uh, like it doesn't really matter if it is or not, but like let's say it is, because it could be. Then it kind of connects to all the TV broadcasts about this football player, and um, and like there is this almost like this sort of constellation tree that opens out of this kind of person in itself. But then that person is also ghostly because most of the people have never actually met the person, this sort of football star, but they have only met them on TV screens and maybe saw them in a stadium perhaps, but nevertheless, like it's always this sort of far off form, but a different form like the seed. And on it goes, like you can think of the streets like have this sort of like human-sized pathways. The windows have this sort of sense of a person behind them, but then somebody walked by, and that was like how a particular person you see, whom you even don't know, is like a ghost of other persons that you possibly know. Like old person might remind you of a person you do know, and so on and so forth. So this was like all happening, I don't know, inside a minute. Uh, uh, like suddenly being able to see these things. Um, like this ultimately led me to re-edit this title into social revenants and the multitude of the corpo dash realizations, um, because like there was something corporeal, like coming to corporal form in the idea. But it also made me think, and I will stop soon, I promise. Also made me think, like, okay, what is happening here? Like suddenly there's this new view coming to fore, and uh, I didn't spend much time in that place. But when I walked off from there, the kind of forms and variety of them just kept on continuing. Like new forms came about, I think I put enough examples, but anyway, there would be others. Um, like like that there comes this sort of almost like a new ability to see, but also to potentially operate. Uh, um, uh, and what does it actually then entail? Like how to play with such. And while there could be many other avenues, perspectives open towards this, I think this was like as good as any I could maybe come up with. Because for me, it kind of underlined this, like, okay, there are these cards, and they have this sort of interesting relation that rather than trying to be authentic, they are kind of more like using the world as material and potential and kind of digging out what it could be, but they still play with meaning. Like like I also noticed that the card almost seemed like, in a way, any sentence. But that was interesting in itself because it was kind of like okay, there are concepts and there are sentences and there are paragraphs and um, but they could also be cards in a kind of similar way. But they behave differently. They are saying that their communication is like a portal, like jump through here. Uh, so it was opening this also this avenue of how uh, like as meanings they can open this sort of playability to the world. But that still leaves us or leaves one with the question of okay, how to play with it. And I have some other thoughts on this, like, but I will shut up for now, uh, and frame this uh, whatever intro as a as an example mostly, uh, which is supposed to kind of outline this sort of how to play with these things possibility, like what comes from the possibility of making such cards quotation marks, and what kind of play culture it can open. um, I think it's a sort of an interesting question, uh, but you can decide if you agree or what do you
Uh,
think of that.
as is the general case with my self-assigned role of trying to simplify or understand, I guess, yeah, as an understander error. um i wonder I wonder if what you're talking about could be described as an operation of mm, expanding things into networks.
It is partly that, but it's it's actually, I think it's even like a minor part of the operation in the sense that, like from my side, like think there there is this one quality that for me is key, is that like there are meaning relations to the world, but most of those are kind of like propped and designed or formulated in terms of like almost like pointing to things like chair, that's a chair, or then pointing to a non-existent or non-present chair in itself, and that's a particular relation. But like in this kind of case, it's actually kind of not pointing something like in a similar fashion. It's more um like digging under the surface and then taking some material and building something out of it. And while those kind of things can have network qualities, and of course the social ghosts uh, or social revenants, whatever, has network qualities in itself, like because like that's the social part of it. Um, but not all of them are so networky necessarily in that sense. But yeah, that kind of quality is there. But like I think it's more the sort of um, like a wholly different relation to what to do with meaning. Like like maybe crudely one could say that it's like meaning being like a play token, play piece on a board. Maybe that works.
Maybe by imagining this, by playing these cards and sort of again reinventing the positioning of this thing that appear to you, like, you know, in this cafe, you sort of reposition meanings, but also function of those existing elements to another multiverse where they act differently or they exist differently. So you expand their realm of possibilities by using the sort of cards system.
Yeah, I think it is sort of like that. Yes,
Which
I agree.
opens up possibilities as well. By doing that, it's like you unlock, there's something that is unlocked once you do that.
Yeah, and it also kind of reorders the pieces. Like it's almost like compared if you were looking at a painting and then you discovered while looking at it that it's actually kind of almost like in jigsaw pieces, and then you would reorganize it. It's a clumsy metaphor, but sort of works.
Yeah, I find that like Linda's idea that like one of the key things is like about like opening up kind of possibilities and kind of in a sense also like networking with the possibilities. Like at the same time you are like making observations, like there are the chairs and there is the football player and there are windows which have kind of, and then which help you, then you have a kind of system for kind of or so that they generate possible content in a sense, and kind of you can wander along route and kind of make this like portals and time jumps and whatever, like for instance just like from the football player you can enter the kind of football verse and TV verse and so on, but at the same time the original image or the original like situation or experience will still like hold it all together in a sense, so that even if you would not know, or the reader or observer would not know kind of what holds it together, there will still possibly be some sort of like sense of everything in a sense being fragments of something that was once like somehow held together or so on.
Yeah, I think that's a good description as well. Like the sort of like suddenly there opens this sort of mapping of these portals, and then you can go through the portals, and then you're kind of travel, like in a way, like yes, you reconfigure, in a way you travel in the same material, but you end up in different positions, so to speak. That's another way of looking at it, definitely. But I think like in itself, like it really made me think like, okay, if like it's of course just an example, but it's a sort of like it describes certain qualities of this kind of play that that is true of all the kind of card structures that we made in Pioneer as well, like more or less, like they have all different qualities, but this thematic kind of goes through it, like this sort of like getting from here to elsewhere while being here, kind of thing. And but then that to me kind of opens these questions, like okay, but like how do you, like what then is the interesting way of playing it? And like I said, this is like more like a positive dilemma than a negative one, because there's infinity of ways, but then it opens this question of like, what would be an interesting way to play from this as because there are so many, there must be some that are more interesting than others. And that's the question that I was thinking.
Just one like one kind of opening comment for that. Like I really liked how you described how you came into like thinking about this, because you kind of like okay, now first I thought this or noticed this, and then that brought that other thing to my attention, and then I expanded from there and so on, and noticed that there are these like similarities and so on. But like so that kind of you of course you were in the scene, because the scene was before you came to think those things, but at the same time it would be very cool kind of also as a kind of storytelling in a sense, kind of so that oh hey, first I in that image or in that space I first like positioned myself there and then made these like notifications, and then like things started to chain and open up and so on, but somehow like going in and from there, like more than like observing from outside, kind of taking part into the kind of the setting, the scene.
Yeah, like, and that was kind of the reason why I kind of chose to describe the situation, which was kind of like more or less exactly how it happened. Partly because I think there's something about also the pathway, but the funny thing is also, or an interesting thing, however one wants to think about it, is like this repeated. Like I could have picked other examples, like let me see if Zoom gives me control. Yes, I won't make a similarly long example. I promise, I swear. But like, um, this was in a different place. Maybe this, but let me see. Like, if I have it will be this awful Zoom, but I think it's still the best example I had from there, because I had to take it in semi-secret, because it's a route to take pictures like towards people. So I had to take it like not looking at the screen, so it's a little bit shaky. So, but here was like I came up with this idea that reflection as a concept is so complex that maybe it could be a suite of things, and then I just made up, okay, reflection version glass, and that's the utter simplicity of the idea I had. And then that created this, well, there is a, in glass, I mean, of course there's a mirror in the background, but there is these glasses, like the drinking glasses, and that's like has this sort of transparency of reflection. But then like quite quickly, once again, like maybe 30 seconds or something, that made me notice that I wish I had a massive zoom camera that, say, all of these glasses kind of contained the whole room, that the whole room was folded inside the glasses, but in different ways, and often in double. Like one version of the room went one way, and another version of the room went the other way. And immediately when you move your head, the whole room like wrapped itself around itself and moved and twisted, and then I saw them everywhere. And I wanted to outline that in a short version. There's more to that, but like it's the same thing happening in a way. Like the same thing as with the empty chairs and the social ghosts or social revenants comes to be available. And like there were many things that one could find. Like I think after that there is the I mean, it's not the best reflection also because the cameras don't really pick reflections that well. But I could also see in my glasses that were on the table, like similarly like curved reflections of the whole room as well. Um, and this open up, yeah, open up a lot, which I'll cut off for now because otherwise I talk too long. But like mostly to underline this opening, this kind of wormholey behavior, and some of this behavior is something that we recognize is in the world, like that we do recognize that there is this phenomena of glass in glass, but it's almost like it doesn't care whether it's recognized by others or not. It kind of treats that quality in an agnostic fashion, like it doesn't matter. Um, uh, but then also kind of really takes you into a different kind of place, like looking at this glass and the reflections of it was a whole nother range of things. So that quality, that entrance, which is also in the social ghosts.
I think it would be really useful if this, I mean, this is obviously speculation, but if this card, playing cards in this way was sort of mandatory in like big sort of conglomerates of people that do quite, you know, tight corporate jobs, or like educational courses that don't really use imagination much or creativity, like forcing people to play this game periodically, you know, once a week, to exercise, because you know, ultimately you will exercise to get better and to play better. I think that could be very useful on a, yeah, on many levels.
Yeah, I agree. Like, and I think actually one of the reasons why I agree quite strongly is that I think there is a whole nother game that actually kind of is just starting at that point. The game, in a way, like you could say, it's already a game, and I agree with that. But you could also say the game is really just starting. It's a bit like you know, like this is also why the cards are rather fitting here as well as the kind of structural, I don't know, metaphor, allegory, name anyway, is that like we think of cards, even the traditional playing cards, and we talked about this a lot, that okay, there are suits and there can be decks and hands, and of course there could be variations. But there's a whole other paradigm, is that all these cards are also games, like they are bridge and they're poker and they're solitaire and other things. Like, and then like putting this question then, like, oh yes, there could be a reflection suit, and like social vampires produce social ghosts, but even the social ghosts could become types and different cards, and I even made some, um, and so on. But that's in the branchway of the suits and decks and hands kind of thing. But then there's the whole other pathway. It's just like, okay, but how do these cards play? Like where do you put them? How do you play this? How does this card play this social ghost, social revenants, and the forms they take? And that for me was this both like really this sort of positive challenge kind of a question, because I think it's a big question, but it's a very interesting question.
Just one short comment. What I found interesting with that those images of glasses was like kind of when you told about them, I started kind of thinking, okay, what sort of like properties could you give to glass as a material? In a sense, if you wouldn't know about your surroundings kind of if you would first kind of if you couldn't be sure what is the reality outside, if you were kind of taking the kind of perspective of the glass and kind of okay, does it mirror, does it enhance, does it fold, what does it do, and then now that you put this this image here back, I remembered you told about those social ghosts in the windows and their relation to glass and this kind of
Yeah, exactly.
objects becoming like meaningful, even if they are kind of frames or they are like they are something that create meaning and associations, but at the same time it feels that these like concrete tangible objects start becoming very real because they transfer their meanings between images, and you can always find similarities material wise between images.
Between images and environments and really any media, but I totally agree with you in general, that like it can happen because you're walking around and thinking about the glass, but then you have the social ghost and suddenly you see the reflection of a person and suddenly you have a co-alignment of two things, like precisely as you described, like just as an environmental example, like and that for me was like yeah, one more thing was that once I was playing this, there was a distinctly different quality of where I was. Like like a rough way of saying it was that my capabilities of movement had added like maybe a couple or three dimensions. Like I felt like distinctly even felt like, oh, I'm here, but now I moved here, and now I moved here. I don't mean literally in this, like, but you know what I mean. Like, I sat on this and I was in vampires and I was considering the voice intonations of this guy in memory. But then the social ghosts appeared, and suddenly there was this, as Pablo described, a very networky picture of ghostly human traces. And I was sitting in the same place, like, and nothing really had changed. And like this was a constant quality. Like you were suddenly kind of, the worlds were changing. So there was clearly a lot of power there, even in this raw sense of haven't still figured out like different rules upon this, and just like moving, switching cards, but still like even here, even in that, there is a lot of power.
How is this game called?
How is this what?
This game called? How are these cards called? Is it something to do with reality?
I mean, we have many names in the store we could call it. Like, I mean, we made, like, this was kind of partly influenced that we made the practical version uh, for Jakob's party, which was called, like, not tongue-in-cheek, but slightly lightly, Marot, which is like magician of tarot kind of thing. But that this was really kind of like a hack from things that we have used earlier. And of course that was informed very strongly about this, everything we've done with the cards, and it wasn't really new in this sense, but just the versioning out of that. But in a way, it's also like you could say this is all creation of Oxels, like you're reorganizing the world. Like in like I think the positive is like one can name it whatever seems fitting, I guess.
I just might have a question a bit linked with Linda's here also, but and I have to say sorry that I was a little bit distracted at the beginning of this story because I'm already
no problem
at the same time. So when you were sitting there and this thing with the social ghosts or vampires began, were you was that because you played a card, or was it because you began thinking as if you could make a card? And were you basically was your move there really to make a card and look via that?
That's a good question. I think if one would answer one way, maybe it's strongly, or it has more strongly the make a card, but these two things sort of blend into each other. Like it's like you make a card to play a card, kind of would be maybe the best way I could describe it. Like I was let's say, like, practically I was intentionally also making cards to see what kind of cards would come up, like but and then immediately making a card, it was about playing the card of what does it then do, like, so yeah, a little bit of both, but certainly content is making a card.
Because I think there's something interesting in what Linda said there, in this kind of a bit almost kind of educational way of forcing organizations to go through with this, because this is something that, like, maybe is also a part that is still to be discovered here in the way, like, how do we play these things? It's like, what happens if you pull a thing that kind of doesn't, so to speak, originate from the situation the same way that your thoughts there originated kind of with you in that situation. So, like, I think that's there I think is a kind of interesting, how to say, different thresholding somehow.
Yeah.
Of these two moments.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I had to mute because there was background noise, but I heard everything you said, like, and I agree with you. But and like I said, I have like thought about it and have some ideas of, okay, what does it mean then to play from here? And it's not, I don't think it's one answer. It's kind of like the answer is like almost like just like a traditional card deck. It's like, hey, I made up solitaire, and then somebody comes and, oh, that's cool, I made poker, and like so it doesn't have this one answer. I think the range is actually way wider than the traditional card deck, but it has the same quality in itself. Like, but still, like, I do think there are some ways to look at it, but I also didn't want to push it. So it's interesting to hear your thoughts along these lines. And I think, Martin, you're onto something with the last couple of comments, like, also.
And maybe because I came too late, but Jakob, you weren't in the very, very first minutes of this call. Are you still here anyway? Yes. Because maybe it could be interesting to hear what happened on this weekend now. On Jakob's side, where we had kind of prepared somewhat this, and if Jakob is with us, maybe it would be nice to hear how it played in that moment.
So can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so yeah, unfortunately I don't have much to report because it went different ways than we expected the whole few days, because partially, yeah, trouble with organizing stuff because several performers did not come. So yeah, unfortunately there was a lot of stuff that did not give me enough mental space to actually do the XORG activities. I tried kind of half-heartedly during the lunch, just kind of sketching the 3 rules, and so we played a little bit at the table, but was not able to actually convey the, like, so we tried and it was fun for a bit, and then there was this question like, okay, but why? And then it shifted to more like, oh, so let's do like different structured ways of escapism, as someone named it, like singing songs or stuff like that. so I wasn't able to actually embody or live the XORG view and convey it. So it kind of fell flat, and we did not, unfortunately, there were like, I didn't have the energy and conviction to actually like push it through to infuse the weekend. Yeah, but I'm
Can you say,
like writing down.
can you do you remember where or why it fell flat? What was the thing that made it that didn't was it just what was the thing?
It was more like, so kind of we were playing with the table, and then okay, so this table is the table of and there was the desolate, and it was just like a 2 or 3 rounds at the beginning, and it was more like, oh yeah, so that's kind of fun, so we're playing with this fantasy what this could be, but it didn't get to the point of the hook. It's like, oh yeah, this is really fun, or it's like, oh, there's something. So it kind of naturally shifted away to something more familiar, like songs or something like that. Yeah.
Actually,
But I guess
do say.
Yeah, but I think it was like mostly really it was that I wasn't that settled in myself into the framed activities, and to really like pull it through to actually when it gets momentum and where it starts getting alive. So that was, yeah, because my head was more like full of organizational stuff. Yeah.
No, but that's like, that kind of underlines to, I think, like important things, like of course the communication itself, which is hard, and it's always hardest at the beginning of something. Like one could say for the structures, we're kind of still at the beginning. That's one thing. But then second is the why question, which is kind of interesting. Like, I mean, we all know history that every human culture, a new culture that appears, subculture, seems to face this question, why? The why kind of becomes filled by the fact that other people do it. Like in different levels, like from parents saying to kids that are writing stories. Well, nowadays they don't say that as much because now it's accepted part of culture. But like if such a thing happened earlier, like, this is useless, get a real job, or start learn real things. But also like any form of art in itself has kind of starts from this why. Like you can see it in the happening culture before it became consolidated as performance. Like, why is this being done? This is not real art. All of these kind of come from the same theme. Of course, it doesn't mean that everybody then has to start doing it, but it means that like most of the things have a social reason. Like the why is often because others are doing it. And if others aren't doing it, then the why question persists. So I'm kind of not too worried. I'm even kind of slightly flattered by the why question.
Yeah, and I wasn't worried neither. I was just a bit disappointed that I wasn't in the state to really like utilize the time and the space to give it more focus or energy. Yeah, I would say, and I think that the why would actually start kind of self-evidencing by just, oh, there's glimpses of something that's fun and not just but something. It's like, oh, this could actually change some ways how we are functioning in a normal world or life. So yeah, but just didn't hold the space long enough for this to emerge.
could one answer simply but mystically, adding it to add extra dimensions to the world?
Yeah.
Like, I'll if Zoom decides to, yes, I'll give a third really quick example.
Yeah, and by the way, sorry, Pekko, I just it was not my why, because I know the whys. It was just that there was this why at the table. So
No, I didn't think it's your why. I was actually, that's how I understood that you kind of like get
Okay.
the feeling of why from the table. That's like
Mhm.
because I can kind of see that like and I've faced the question why upon multiple things like in these reality games and so on like many times. So that sounded very familiar. But I Martin raised a hand, which is unconventional, and now we have to respect this.
I'm just, it's just coming across the thought when you were speaking, which is like this whole thing for us that we're doing here, and that the card are now a kind of manifestation number, like version so and so much of, is in a sense to kind of create or understand, or both at the same time, organizational possibilities or possibilities of organizing. And so in both response to what Jakob just said, and also this again, what Linda mentioned earlier with kind of going through this with, you know, square code real organizations, that it could be kind of funny maybe to, and insightful is what I mean by funny, to add into this card game also more known forms of organizing. Just to kind of put them in relationship as a kind of almost a translating act and see, so if we isolate those things that we have basically naturalized as this is how we do stuff, I don't know if it's a kind of 9-to-5 workday, or if it's a lunch break, or if it's a certain hierarchy order, or I don't know what it is that one could put in a card or in a suit. And just kind of to kind of, so to speak, isolate them and extract them from their unconscious flow of working. And then just to try the same kind of question that we're asking us right now, how would that play in a given situation? That
Actually,
would maybe help to clarify this whole thing.
Yeah, actually, yes. And I like that's actually one of the thematics that I had in mind in towards how to play with this. Although, like, it's interesting maybe to compare because you are already thinking about it in your head and probably differently. So maybe this, like, how to play with real world organizations is with this is an interesting comparison point. But I do think it's a rather interesting and even kind of weirdly subtle possibility. And I give an example of it. I managed to think how I condense this picture, and it contains both an example of the why, hopefully, at least in one way, and then an example of maybe these real world organizations, or does. So there were these pigeons, a flock of them, and this was a big field, and the pigeons were moving into this field that was cut by these roads that you can see slightly on the sides. I couldn't really take a whole view, but I took this sort of snapshot. So they were flying like between the roads into these fields and moving very coordinated fashion to pick up some things, probably something to eat from the ground. And there was something interesting about the movement itself. So this is still like in Martin's terms, yeah, it contained this card creation, and I just named this. Like this picture is really just like material for it. It's not like it's only this picture, but nevertheless, like. But my original name was like coordinated sense of possibility, which became quite quickly coordinated sense of the possible of possibilities. But that came from the sense that like these, like how the pigeons were moving, it had this sense that there is, you know, you can talk about visual sense and auditory sense and whatnot, but there is almost like the sense of what are your possibilities. Like in a way, like it's not an infinity where you're selecting what you're doing, but you're selecting from a palette, and the palette is kind of coordinated by the environment and yourself. And the movement of pigeons was like clearly like you could predict the range of what they were about to do. But then, like, which is not present in this photo, is like when I raised up like my head from taking this picture, there were these people moving around because it was this larger field. And then there was immediately the similarity between the pigeons and the people's movement, and there was once again this coordinated sense of the possible or possibilities, like that they have the sense of the possible, like certain walk routes. Other possibilities, like I can cross the field, I can walk along the road alongside the field, but then less likely that I will skip along the field, or it's possible to stop, but it's unlikely to fall on your face, intentionally at least, and so on and so forth. So that's the kind of, that was the, and the coordinated was somehow, once again, this social idea, that maybe it was the pigeon flock, and then, but it was also in the people. But then this really started opening up, like somehow the whole title haunted me, like immediately, like it was somehow like it had more meaning than it felt, and the words didn't contain it. So I sat down somewhere like on a bench, and I started making like alternatives, like coordinated somehow felt like also co-opted, like co-op something, like it's that you do something that others did, but also configured, uh, and then conjectured. Like conjecture is when you have like partial information and then you come to rationalization of what to do. But then I felt like there is a loop now from conjecture to coordinated. So they came this almost like elevator that you could go from coordinated up to configured, and then you could go from there in a loop to conjectured and come back to coordinated, or then you could go down from coordinated to co-opted. But then there was like, what came to my mind was the word concert, uh, uh, and then that was, I placed that down from the co-opted. But then Sense had an elevator down that had spectrum, and then the concert of the spectrum became like a, like if you go levels down, you come to spectrum, and you come levels down from coordinated, you end up in concert of the spectrum, which was then equally mystifying but somehow fitting sentence, and and so on and so forth. So it formed this sort of essentially a constellation of text. But when I wrote this, there is the shitty picture of the notebook in the in the in the group. But like looking at it, it came to my mind that you could write a text that is like not a poem, not a short story certainly, but it's an organization. Because it felt like moving in this text was like visiting a building, because you're moving up and down. And then it forms a certain kind of meditation, you could say, sense of like what is the possible at any point. But then moving like that, now I'm in coordinated, now I went to configured, it would change like the sense of that possibility. So it really felt like you're moving on a map, even though you're looking at whatever situation you are in. So it painted almost like that the text was a map, and then like visiting this organization, which was this title, was a little bit like that, becoming almost like this invisible building hovering over any situation you're in. But that then, and this is where it hits upon real world organization in a very wide sense is like, why couldn't there be a text form called just organization? I mean, you could make a more convoluted name for it, but nevertheless, it could exist. And because the principles of that were already there, that you're writing something that is actually this sort of movable thing that you move around, which is a quality in poems, but here it's like outlined. But then those texts are also to be read in the sort of meditative fashion in relation to environment, as if you were like in the role of an organization in there, or visiting the organization by its map. And then like certainly it makes sense. And why I thought this is an interesting example of this sort of touching upon real world organization, although rather maybe unconventional, is this like that it is saying an organization of text generated from the card that came in, I don't know, 5 minutes. It's a rather unconventional take on text. And therefore, maybe it also points out to why this sort of going to extra dimensions is interesting. Because if it's possible from them to like almost offhandedly reorganize many conventions of text, and then come back and then say, actually, now this is an organization of text produced by this. It's like an interesting touching point in itself. If that made any sense, hopefully it had some touching points that were understandable. Or maybe not. Or was it unclear completely, partly?
We cannot hear you, Mikael. I can see you moving the mouth and being unmuted, but
Oh my God.
okay, now, yes. We just
We
had
heard, oh my God. And then there was slight mic noises after that.
maybe if you move like that, if you move back, because when you move back,
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
yes,
Okay, that's great.
yes.
Yeah, it's my headset. The wire has some sort of like connection problem. But
Like my camera.
what did you mean by like capability of like moving up and down in the text and so on? Just like clarifying a bit.
So imagine like, I wish I had the picture from the group. I think it's in the other group, but it like there's like really concretely, like I wrote like the title in one line, the coordinated sense of the possible of possibilities. And then I drew a line down from sense that contained the spectrum, and drew a line down from coordinated. I wrote co-opted, but then I drew a line down from that and wrote concert. And like, and so what you end up is this sort of like a really a constellation of text. Uh, like so then well, it happened quite kind of naturally, but then this idea, it's like a map. Like it looks like a map in this sense, and then somehow immediately connected to this, like these are almost like floors, and then it's like, okay, it's almost like taking an elevator, because there was like, if you were thinking of this, contemplating is maybe the best word, through the coordinated sense of the possible, it felt different than, say, the co-opted sense of the possible or configured sense of the possible. So changing that word, for example, is like moving like an elevator. Like I mean, yes, you are in many places of the text. It's a little bit breaks that, but nevertheless, like, so that's essentially what I meant. It's actually rather simple, ultimately.
To me, this operation reminded me of sort of configuring a space and exploring that space in the sense of like a neural network that creates a space between two images, and then you can traverse the space in between them. And of course, an image conjures a meaning in your head, and the other image also conjures a meaning, and the stuff in between is like ambiguous, right? And mapping these words in a space allows you to traverse that space in the same way, in the sense of maybe the space in between two words is a bit gibberish, but maybe you arrive at a word that looks like the other word. Maybe it's written with similar letters. Maybe it has a similar meaning. There's different ways of creating the distance between them, right?
Yes.
And I find that operation really interesting as like both the process of mapping and the process of traversing. So I was thinking of that while you were speaking.
Yeah, and just to add, like the kind of ambiguous state between like some sort of like interpretations or acts of like interpreting or something like that. It's really interesting, and when kind of looking at that like image of like pigeons, I'm sorry, what are they? What were they? But like of the birds. So it's kind of reminds me also like that when you are in that like ambiguous state, it's also about like well, depending, are you like in the mode of like more like reading or more like writing? It's also about like isolating and cutting clusters or clusters of meaning or something, like also like when you construct a mirror, you only want to construct the mirror and not the one who is watching it as well. But so you have to let kind of the space of interpretation for the one who will look into the mirror, and the one after that, and the one after that, and so on. So that's an interesting like design space in a sense that Pablo was mentioning.
Agreed. And that's a good description with the mirror. And I thought actually this picture, which we had for the social ghosts, can work as maybe concretizing for this coordinated sense of the possible. Like if I have that text, this constellation of a text map, organization of a text, like if I see like coordinated sense of the possible, I would see this sort of uh, like okay, that there is this whole arrangement, organization that is opening possibilities. It's the chairs, but that makes me note about also the yellow pads or the orange pads, making it more visible in itself, like inviting to sit. That it's actually like trying to shout louder its possibility, and that in itself has been an act of coordination. But like if I think about it, like in the sense of let's say the configured sense of the possible, I can think, oh, okay, actually there is like this sort of configurations of certain amounts of people. So it has these ideas of the sizes of the people, that it's and why are these coordinations usually in these kind of sizes? Why it's 3, 4? Maybe that's the table size, but I'm now in a different floor, so to speak, on this text. Um, and if I take like uh, uh, let's say the coordinated spectrum of the possible, then like this uh, spectrum is interesting from like, and of course these are personal, and the title itself would need in its support, in its description, probably these kind of things outlined to help with it. But that's completely possible. But for me, spectrum is this sort of like if the sense is like the gestalt of like what is available to me or to a human in palette, the spectrum is almost like the pieces that it's made of. Like then that starts to open up this sort of like how the chairs are pieces and the chairs are moving with tables, and how they're kind of not chained but are connected to each other, and that the pads are connected to the chairs, and how there is this sort of like invisible clustering by what tables are and what chairs are and what the pads on the chairs are, and like and this is me contemplating the same text moving different floors and bringing different meanings, and that's kind of how I imagined this visiting the organization that this text was, and suddenly at least for me it makes total sense. It's kind of like you could call it a poem, and there are poems that are sort of like that, but at the same time, like it was actually more opening if I thought of it as like it's an organization I belong to if I'm reading it. I thought of it as visiting it.
Say that again. It's an organization that
I belong to if I'm reading the text or contemplating it. Now, like what I did just now was me in the organization, which is a little bit like a person who is like sitting on a bar or whatever and thinking about their job. And like, oh, I should send that email and so on. It's not that different, actually. So, like, in a way, it makes sense. In a very, like, it's using unconventional pathways, but it's not that those pathways don't really connect. They're not even that weak connections, but they just don't normally connect. That's the only difference. So, so like in this sense, like it's kind of like, on one way, to Martin's point of like joining with real world organization, well, it's doing it in different ways. Like, of course, it's calling the text organization, but that's not actually the point I was trying to make. It's more like it's joining the conversation or discourse around the organization of text, and coming up with a new form, which is part of the discourse then of how the text is organized, like poems and short stories and whatnot, and then introducing a new form. So in a way, it's engaging then in a discourse about a particular form of organization, just in this case, organization forms of text. But for me, it's underlining the subtlety is like, because it could also, you could make actually that organization of text into a group in Telegram, and then people create different organizations like these text and visit each other's organizations, and that's another way of tapping into real world organization.
And can I maybe take this moment and kind of step a couple of steps to the side and in another direction, just maybe it's a bit difficult for me to frame or phrase, so I hope that maybe we can also construct this a bit together. What I'm thinking is, you've now mentioned the idea of poetry or poem a couple of times, and then also now for today, there's been a few examples that you have given that we have now followed a bit in depth, and I don't want to say principles, but the kind of organizational structures that you have revealed through them were such which you conjured up in a sense in the moment where you were using the project, or using the scarecrow card as a projection method almost for yourself. It's almost like a hoop that you hold for yourself to jump through.
Yeah, that's actually a description that I almost traced the same. Like I think of
Yeah.
it as a kind of portal-like, that it's meaning that behaves portal-like.
That's what I was going to kind of say now in the next thing and the next sentence, that how about in terms of conceiving in this of this a bit. I don't want to say that, but anyway, like if we could, because the one thing that I think is quite special in this, if we kind of go back to in this card strategy or structure as a method, is that it allows also grace of the flat hierarchy and the fact that it is cards, so it's always gappy, and they have to not necessarily make sense because they're kind of separate. So like all these kind of ominous properties, qualities, allow for there to be a receptacle, which
we can still hear you. The mic changed, but the words are still legible. Another point at the dramatic, another loss at the dramatic point. We lost Mikael earlier, but perhaps we can see if Martin makes it back.
It's those ghosts.
Can anybody take the role of Martin and play this, and then Martin, when he comes back, he can play himself? It's a challenging thing, I know. Like he was going to I think a rather refined point. I like the direction he was going. So
this is not what Martin said, but it just reminded me that someone recently said that dramaturgy is about organizing material in time and space. And in that sense, it also applies to text quite wonderfully. Also, like bringing text and other elements together in a sense.
Yeah, and also like really sentences organization of words, and paragraph is organization of words and sentences. Like even Malarm, when he called himself a syntax error, he wasn't only meaning grammar. He was meaning like that it's an arrangement question that he's tackling with again and again, like syntax error and economist. But then economist, he was kind of thinking organization. But yeah, like it's there. But yeah, it's the funny thing and the rabbit hole in the word organization, at least if one thinks like in terms of like looking at a table and thinking I have to organize this, that kind of sense of the concept it is ultimately everywhere. Like, well, you organize a meeting and then you organize the words that you say in the meeting and you organize your setup. You could use that concept to everything, like ultimately, and it still makes sense. And I think that rabbit holiness is rather intriguing. But now we have a dramatic pause of waiting for Martin.
And then just one short comment more, and I really like the way words, for instance, or like strings of letters can make these portals because of course they have their material basis, but at the same time like kind of they are abstract and ambiguous enough, or they can be composed that way, or clustered that way, organized that way, that they create this sort of like both like portals where there are few wormholes where kind of more certainly where you will end up, but they will also always bring with them these portals that you don't actually know where you are going to end up. So I really like them.
Yeah, and it's also like, it's interesting that it really could be other things and can be other things than words. Like you can use just an image, but it's true that there is this quality of words of like portalness, that they allow for a lot of movement because of this. Like this sort of facing a situation and this sort of slightly uncanny feeling of like pigeons moving around, and like you often like, yes, you can take a picture of it and the picture actually kind of contributes to the whole, but then the words kind of like can bring the uncanniness to it, which is an interesting quality of it. One could resort again to Malarm to quote poets, like he called words normative by nature, like that they have a, like every word starts out as normative, like it's been normalized to death in a way, and then he had a lot of different allegories. One of them was this, that when they're organized they become a labyrinth, and then they are like little, like what's it, fleur de lys, it's like this sort of lighted flowers in the wall of the labyrinth that can light up if they are organized in a labyrinth, and then they have their own specialities because they light in a particular way to the labyrinth itself. And so organizing them creates this possibility of their speciality. Like, I don't remember the, it's a convoluted passage, but it's kind of fitting. Like he's talking about organization ultimately there. Like you start with these normative pieces, then you organize it into a labyrinth. You walk in the labyrinth, and suddenly, because you're in the labyrinth, that thing that is a word lights up in a particular way and lights up the labyrinth. That's what he's saying.
Yeah, and what is also very interesting, that kind of in his, or let's say the découpe d'idées, or what is it in
Throw
English?
the dice.
Yeah, throw the dice never abolishes the chance. The meaning of empty space between the fragments is, or can be kind of interpreted to be at least as important as the text and the kind of ink itself. So in that sense, like also the kind of taking the space into account when using words was something very unique.
Yeah, one could nerd out on this. I'll just add one sentence. Like the idea of the title is that the throw of the dice abolishes the chance, or like in French, it's the chance is hazard. Is that in a way? I mean, there was many meanings to it, but one of them is like reading in itself is like the words are like dice. They have this normative, but every time you read, you throw the dice, and they land to specific numbers, and that takes away the chance in two ways. The dice becomes a particular meaning, and the text is arranged. Therefore, the chance is lost in that way as well. Like anyway, now I'm nerding out about structural qualities, Mahler. But we have Martin back to save us from this nerdery.
Am I supposed to?
We have been waiting for your dramatic moment.
Yes, thank you. I was cut off. I sent it now, I think, in the chat. But still, what I was, so I basically maybe already said it, that I think that the cards might just be, but just is of course not a small thing, but like this kind of hoop to jump through, or portal to kind of throw oneself in, to kind of record. I think that's not the wrong word. Maybe it's not the wrong word. What one kind of gathers to be potentially interesting or useful organizational structures, and then kind of push them there and share them by that way with others for hopefully generative use.
Yes.
maybe it's as easy as that. And the difference being that it's a poetic way of doing that.
Yes, and that's a very nice description because Martin, you just also described what we use text for. And I don't think that's an
Mhm.
accident. Your description is, or even other art forms,
Mhm.
like that there is this similar quality of expression.
Mhm.
And I actually am rather delighted by this because it's almost saying like it can like not turn but translate the uncanny a moment or thought which you cannot really turn, but you can translate from it into an expression, and that the expression can revoke a new uncanny in other people, which is the form of text. And the cards can do the same, which is something that kind of fits what I've been finding is that there is this general potential of expression that encompasses what we expect from other forms of expression, but also does it differently. It's in what you were pointing out with this portal quality. There is a portal quality to words, yes, but the portal quality here is stronger, like maybe underlined by these examples. And one of the reasons why I wanted to start from this example was to point out this sort of rather radically how it rips you from the normal to the abnormal, I guess. Like now I'm in the realm of social ghosts and I'm looking for networking traces and seeing weird forms of existence, quote unquote. And now I move to something completely different in itself. Um, uh, and that in itself is a rather potentially a powerful thing. But it's not different, and this is tracing back to what, say, we did in Paimio, is like, say, Linda, when we were going with the crossbreeder, we were still in an environment. It was the same place we walked many, many times. And suddenly it was like things, I don't know, racing through it with pieces of paint, your kind of also expansive versions, but it's looking at the same like courtyard in a hospital ground, so to speak, the same kind of radical abnormal coming to play. And like if one puts those side by side, there is something very similar about this social ghost in this portalness, and that uh, those developments as well. So so that combined in itself like is this sort of that there is this range of expression that is touching upon whatever we expect from our expressions, but it also kind of points out to certain specialities that are not like utterly separate. Like you could do some of these things with text, but it's somehow also special enough that it's something different than you would expect from normal text. And that for me is interesting. And the one word I would add from your palette of words that you've used, Martin, is platforms. Is that when you make the card, it's also possible to think about it kind of like a platform, that it allows that potentially just a wispy thought that probably would disappear to have some platforms to stand on and invite others to stand upon it as well.
Yeah, both for yourself and for others and
Yes.
for other thoughts. So
Yes.
like, yeah, no, and I think like, I mean, if I can just kind of maybe dwell on this for a
Yeah.
second, it's like, I think this does a couple of, like, framing it this way, there's a couple of things I think that maybe have like that maybe help, like also anyway, like I think it demystifies a bit the question of what's the engine for the cards, because it puts it straight back at you or in you, like to be decided how that could be phrased. So that's an easy thing. The other thing is it does in a quite nice way, I think. It also demystifies / neutralizes or like simplifies what the card then really is. Because yes, there are certain structures that we have now kind of given to it when we were, for example, here. There were certain kind of fields on it that we thought we could fill out. There were certain ways in which we thought we could fill them out. But in a sense, it both kind of affirms these structures, but it also liberates for the creation of other structures. So there's it doesn't, like when we say card, it's basically, it's a projection. It's a projection thing in one sense, and then it's a kind of portable thing in another way, like a handleable on thing. And in all that, it's a poetic thing, like the way it wants to work. And I think there's a couple of maybe useful kind of handles on it that would not really, to me, appear not to be limiting of it, like of its potentials.
Yeah, I would agree. Like generally, like in a way, what you said about this sort of like it being not limiting, it kind of harmonizes with the idea of a card, both in the sense like that even a traditional deck of cards, even though it's always the same, ending up in different games, it's a different thing. And then there's always like, oh, I made a new card game or learned a new card game, and then it reconfigures itself yet again, which is kind of this quality that it can always expand its reality. And that's the nature of the cards. But then there is also
Go ahead.
I'll be short. Like then there's also the possibility, like if you actually think of beyond the traditional card deck and think about all kinds of cards that there are, from tarot cards to say Magic the Gathering cards that are like also have suits and things like this, but are organized differently. Like that opens up yet more of this. Like the card itself could be different, and then in that difference of a card, there could be a different system, but that different system could give room for many games. Like if people would, and they do play different games on Magic the Gathering cards, so on and so forth.
Again, Mikael.
It's
I
the
can't hear you, Mikael.
yeah, it's the cable. It's the
No.
yes.
Okay, I need to lean back. It seems, yeah.
You have to be the critic now, or
Yeah.
that's the critic's position. Sadly, this like your position is very positive in the inward leaning because it speaks of not something else than a critic, but you have to take the critic's body position. Sadly.
So it seems, but hey, my critic is very, very small from now or for the rest of the session because I have another like more like real or how to say it, like event that I should be attending to, and it's 7 o'clock already, so I think I need to leave in just like 2 minutes. So I just wanted to thank you for the discussion. I really enjoyed the ideas presented here, and also like look forward to hearing more about the cards and your time in Paimio and so on. Everything sounds very exciting. So thank you, guys.
Yes, the lateness of the Finnish clock, but generally, I think we should be aiming towards the end because it has been a long session already. But really quickly, just like in terms of this, like these possibilities actually do open up, I think, many visions of how to play with these cards, like how cards play by themselves and how they play with each other. And there is like there's probably much more than, say, at least what I can think of, or even anybody. But the one thing that has opened to me is this that it's constantly in touch with the real world and how it's organized. Like this example of like some card that you create opens up, say, a new form of text, like the organization. But then you create this group that creates such texts, and you're adopting, you're hijacking real world organization practices. like Telegram in itself, for example, but then also this group. It's an example of, in a way, it's play, but that opens up to a very wide spectrum in itself. Like, okay, what if you start to categorize different social ghosts and social revenants, and like, or maybe not categorize them, just find them? What if you share them? How do you share them? Why do you share them? Do you share them to create a catalog of them, which might be interesting in itself because you're re-envisioning how we see, say, a city or a human place? But that's yet another just possible direction among the infinity of them. And then alongside of that, even though those intentionally included mostly like real world examples like telegrams, you can always put in as much like fictional game-like structures. Like, say, this organization that catalogs the social ghosts might think of itself as doing it for other reasons that are not, like, it's not maybe just a hobby, but maybe for other reasons. Or, I don't know, maybe they're hunting for one, or maybe they're looking for one. Not that you have to use those structures, but it's possible to use those structures. It's possible to use real-world structures, so-called real-world. They are open to you. It's possible to use game structures. They are open to you. Both are open. And you can compose the quote-unquote game from the quote-unquote cards from both palettes in hybrids into whichever mix level you want.
We should
That's the
definitely try
horizon.
this. Yeah, and we should definitely try this, I feel.
Yeah.
Like we really should make a test. Like many tests.
Yeah.
Plenty of tests.
I think it has a lot of potential, like in itself. Like it's I have some ideas for it, but that was one like summarizing way I thought about it after playing around with it, that actually that's what's happening. And maybe that's a good point to draw strings into closure. And of course my camera has tilted itself at some point. I will turn it on and stop sharing my screen, put my eyeglasses on as well.
I have perhaps one more thing to mention.
Go ahead, yes.
Just came to my mind. It's off topic slightly, but when I was thinking of kind of an immersive space where those things could be experimented with at some point, so I realized that some of my friends were doing those kind of Erasmus Plus trainings for a week. So you apply for the Erasmus Plus grant, and then you design like week-long training, and then you invite people from, I don't know, 5 or 4 European countries, like young people. And then it's like I have seen a lot of different topics from like wide variety of disciplines. And so I was thinking, oh, perhaps there could be like, we could do at some point a like week-long XORG and playing / training funded by European Union. And like, so yeah, just came to my mind when we were mentioning the funding thingies and kind of immersive environments there where it could be evolving, perhaps. Yes, just so.
That sounds actually really interesting and fertile. And I also agree with Martin when he pointed in the chat that he likes the funded part. It's always nice. It's like taking on funding is also a form of social vampirism, I think, but it's a nice kind of vampirism. But hey, like I think like really it's like the one thing that makes it seem so what to do is really like classic poverty of richness, but it's also really like one can start doing it, and this was my experience with playing around with it, if you just cut it down. Like that, like that's why I was kind of playing. What if I make a new card? What happens? And new things would happen. What if I make this card? And what happens? And new things would happen. Like, but the thing was, it was always working. Like maybe not always, like not all the things were as interesting, but like easily over 75% of the time. And that for me, like, is telling, like, it's actually like somehow almost misleading, this sort of like there's too many choices. Like, it's just like, okay, pick a choice. There probably will be something interesting along the side of this path. And maybe that fits also with Erasmus and so on. Like, it's not that we cannot do it. It's just like, if one tries to cover everything with, or find even the best choice, then it will be just too large. Because there's too many. Like, if you try to write the best poem, then you become alcoholic who doesn't write anything. Or yes, kind of problem. Yes. So, but I do think like ultimately, at least for me, like the kind of direction we opened. Well, it started really before Paimio, but also how we notched it forward in Paimio, and now even with the Marot simple design, etc. It is showing real promise, and we should play with it, whether it's with Erasmus or any context. So let's talk about those in practice in near future.
Yeah, I will be playing with that also in like smaller places. So
Yeah.
following up until the weekend, so I'll let you know.
Yes. Send a message. Any last words, anyone? Something to wrap everything up. That's too much of a challenge. Something anecdotal. Okay, no last words.
I think if no,
Go ahead. Go.
hear me?
Yeah. Yes. You're
Yes,
adventuring.
no, I just wanted to see. Okay, I think my computer wants to kind of kill itself again, but let's see how far we go.
But try. We can still hear you.
No, I just wanted to say that, like, it would be nice to keep some grip on realizing what we tried to begin realizing when we were in Paimio, because I feel also that in that kind of somewhat contouring work might lay new openings, even if it might just be a little bit kind of brainless production work, but like maybe it's brainful production work. But there may be found new openings also to the question, how does it play, etc. So I think it could be nice to, so like Mikael was asking, that we could like wrap a bit on what we did in Paimio, because there hasn't been now really like a report, I think. But maybe we could also combine that, or like, you know, look a bit kind of practically at how we can give a form to this that could be then drawn from.
Yeah, agreed. I think in a way, like even these kind of, I don't know, adventures, at least for me, is kind of like also looking towards that. I don't know if that's successful or not, but that's like precisely that concreteness. But then also, like, I think the concreteness is really like the main thing it depends upon is just having sessions upon it, like, and which are aimed not towards this general perspective, but just like, let's try to think about how to wrap that up, and it's doable. And I would be for that.
Yes.
But with that, I will press now stop recording.